It's rough out there, in the world. Some of us turn to writing for solace and inspiration. Text that helps us take in the dark and find the light. So if you are someone who wraps themselves in words to warm your heart, or maybe just looking for a little help getting through the day, week, year, join us as we talk to people about the pieces of writing they use to bolster their souls and remember their way. The good bones that remind us we can make this place beautiful.
Hey, this is Amy. So normally we would start with Kate saying some kind of beautiful stuff like, this is where we sit with the dark and look toward the light. But we had some significant recording issues during this episode, and some parts were cut off. So this is how it starts today.
I'm your host, Kate.
I'm your host, Amy.
And yeah, writing that we love that helps us sit with the dark and look towards the light. Amy, what are you reading?
I am still going through the October Day series by Sean McGuire. And do I want to tell you about all the work stuff I'm reading? No, but that is why I am going through. I am going through the Sean McGuire October Day series. I don't know. I want to say like 12 times. I'm not exaggerating. I want to say like 12 because I need that comfort, and it's also really good writing. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. What are you reading?
I have picked back up A Field Guide to Getting Lost by Rebecca Solnit, which is a book that I love. It is very like existential, but also grounded. And that's a combination that I need because I'm not the most existential person. But when I go that way, I'm like, nah, where's the ground? Kind of immediately. So I love that it is all about kind of getting lost, but then in that lost, finding a way to root back down. I think that's a good way of putting it. And then I also just love Rebecca Solnit because
she's amazing.
Yeah, she's an excellent writer and really funny, but in a like serious. I don't know. She's just great.
I first heard of her with Men Explain Things.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's one of my favorite anecdotes. Because she'd written a book about maps and was at a party. And a man was talking with her about it, and she started to say something, and he was like, no, look, you just really need to read this book. And she was like, oh, is he going to say it? Could it be? And then, yeah, it was her book. He was like, I've been reading this excellent book, and if you're into this, you should really read it. And she was like, could it be? And then he was like, it's this book. And she was like, I wrote it. And that's one of my favorite. It's so good. Like, wow, what are the chances?
Actually, pretty good.
Yeah, they're not bad. No, and that's another thing when she put that anecdote out there, and the book about things men explained to me, or men explaining things to me, like what happened were so many other anecdotes of men referencing women's work to them, which, is really funny in a sad dystopian way. So, yeah. But you know what? We have a wonderful guest. If we had a podcast just to examine that tension, I would listen to it. It's not this podcast.
No. But
for today's podcast, we have a wonderful person who I am excited to introduce you to. Nancy, I meant to check this with you, but it's Nancy Guzman.
Yes.
That is the proper way to say your last name.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. It's Nancy Guzman. Nancy is a fiber artist, witch, tarot reader, horror film fanatic, sci-fi enthusiast, and a Gemini with too many hobbies. Her current aspiration is to be known about town as that weird lady who talks to trees. Aw. She lives in North New Jersey with her partner, Jeff, and their two cats, Franny and Flyboy, which if you are a horror film fanatic as well, you will know where those names came from.
Yes, a bit of trivia inserted into my bio.
Where did those names come from?
They come from the George Romero film Dawn of the Dead. The original Dawn of the Dead, not the remake.
That's one of the ones I haven't watched. because I don't like body horror. So
yes, that is. There's
I like horror, but not body horror.
At the beginning, that is like
I know about
away.
it.
I turn away from it. So you're allowed to not look at certain parts of it.
Yeah.
You're allowed.
I will say as a child, if a scene came on that was too much, like I didn't turn the movie off. I just ran to the other room, put a pillow like over my face and covered my ears, gave it a hot minute, and then went back. So it's like, I don't look, I'm not going to stop this just for this one part. I'll take me out. I'm the problem.
The only
Nancy,
one out of 3, okay?
Yeah. Nancy, what have you brought us today?
I have brought an excerpt from It's a Wonderful Life, screenplay by Francis Goodrich, Albert Hackett, and Frank Capra. So since it is an excerpt from a screenplay, if it's okay, I'd like to just set the scene before I start reading.
Yeah.
So this is from pretty close to the end of the film, and it's during the sequence where George is experiencing an alternate reality in which he was never born. And just prior to this excerpt, he has gone to find his mother, who he hoped would be able to snap him out of this, what he assumes is a delusion that he's having, and has instead found his mother to be a very bitter, angry, and lonely woman who is very, very different from the Ma Bailey that we have met previously in the film. So he's just coming off of that experience. Exterior house night. Medium close shot. George stands a moment stunned. Then he turns and runs out to the sidewalk. We see Clarence leaning on the mailbox at the curb, holding his volume of Tom Sawyer in his hand. Clarence. Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. And when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? George. I've heard of things like this. You've got me in some kind of a spell or something. Well, I'm going to get out of it. I'll get out of it. I know how, too. The last man I talked to before all this stuff started happening to me was Martini. Clarence. You know where he lives? George. Sure, I know where he lives. He lives in Bailey Park. Wipe 2, exterior cemetery night, medium shot. George and Clarence approach the tree from which the Bailey Park sign once hung. Now it is just outside a cemetery with graves where the houses used to be. Clarence. Are you sure this is Bailey Park? George. Oh, I'm not sure of anything anymore. All I know is this should be Bailey Park. But where are the houses? Clarence. You weren't here to build them. Close moving shot. George wandering like a lost soul among the tombstones. Clarence trotting at his heels. Again, George stops to stare with frightened eyes at, close shot, a tombstone. Upon it is engraved a name, Harry Bailey. Feverishly, George scrapes away the snow, covering the rest of the inscription, and we read, in memory of our beloved son, Harry Bailey, 1911 to 1919. Close shot, George and Clarence. Clarence. Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9. George. That's a lie. Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man in that transport. Clarence. Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
I love that even though you are reading it, Nancy, I can hear the lines in that as the actors that that portrayed them. Very famously, I say very famously, and then I forget his famous name, Jimmy Stewart. And I will admit I don't remember the name of the actor that played Clarence.
I I don't remember either, but he was definitely a good, like a well-known character actor at the time. Like I've definitely seen him in other things.
Yeah. And his portrayal of Clarence is,
it's probably his best known role for sure.
Yeah. But also so well known that like this, A Wonderful Life, and just going back to the premise, actually, Nancy, can you describe the premise? You gave us the context for the scene, but what's the premise of the movie?
So the premise of the movie is it's about a man named George Bailey, and the story centers around, essentially it centers around his decision to end his own life.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a lot of backstory and a lot of the histories and the circumstances that have led him to that decision. And the central conflict or the central crux of the film is that he comes to that decision, and then because all of the people in his life realize that he's in crisis, they have prayed for him very hard, and so the decision is made from on high to send an angel down to earth to stop him from killing himself, to convince him that he should not do that.
And the angel's got stakes in it too, because the angel is trying to get his wings.
Yes,
and
exactly.
He has to do. It's a very capitalist heaven.
You gotta earn those wings.
Yeah, you gotta earn them. Which is kind of the opposite of grace, but that's okay. How are you? I have seen this movie. It's been a long time. But how do you remember how you were first introduced to this movie?
I'm sure I saw it on TV at some point, like a lot of people.
Yeah, same.
I honestly don't remember the first time I watched it the whole time through. It's like one of those pieces of art that has just kind of always existed for me. Yeah. But it is one that I do watch it every year, Christmas.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
I've watched it at other times of the year as well. And I come back to it like in my head and in my heart in times of crisis for myself, you know.
Do you come back to this particular scene?
Yes. And also, of course, to the end scene, the scene that everyone remembers, right? Where he opens the book from Clarence. It's his copy of Tom Sawyer, and he's inscribed it with the words. Let me read it. I bookmarked this page. It's inscribed with the words, "Dear George, remember no man is a failure who has friends. Thanks for the wings. Love, Clarence." And then when his wife asks him what that is, he said, "That's a present from a very dear friend of mine." And I come back to that a lot as well. But the reason that I picked this particular scene, the one in the graveyard, is, well, two reasons. One is because to me, that's the turning point for George. To me, that's the point where up to this point, he keeps trying to like snap out of it or prove Clarence wrong or deny that this is happening.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where he starts to understand that even though he sees himself as a failure because he's had to walk away from so many of his dreams and give up on things that he's not the person that he aspired to be. And he sees himself as a failure. And that's a large part of what's led him to the decision to kill himself. And there's also all of, for people who haven't seen the film or don't remember, there's all of this plot about lost money and he's going to go to prison and, there's a kind of MacGuffin involved, right? really it's about that he sees himself as a failure. And for me, this scene is the point in the film where that starts to turn around and he starts to understand the impact that he has on other people's lives and that the way that other people see him is very different from how he sees himself.
Yeah.
And it's also the point where he turns, after this scene, he goes and finds Mary.
Yes.
Right. Not because, all the other people he sought out, it's because he's trying to snap out of it, quote unquote, snap out of this. He goes to find Mary because he wants to make sure that she's okay in a world where he never existed. So it stops being about himself and starts being about other people.
Well, I think that's the big shift too. Like he's not a bad person by any means, but he's so self-centered. Right. Yeah. And he can't see beyond his unfulfilled dreams.
He is in some ways a very self-centered person, like in his emotional life, but he also in his actions is a very not
selfish. Yeah. Oh, in his wit?
And the way that every choice and every time he's walked away from his dreams, it was to make someone else's life better.
Exactly.
Or to do what he knew in his heart was the right thing to do. So yeah, I think he's emotionally very self-centered, but his actions are very, very kind. Like he's essentially a very kind person.
He's not selfish. I think this is actually a really great example of being self-centered, right? Versus being selfish. He's not a selfish person. If he was a selfish person, then he would have put himself and his needs first, right? But he is, and so I think, it's a distinction that I love to make for myself. Not about myself too, but remembering that being self-centered is not the same as being selfish, and that both you can be selfish and not necessarily self-centered. You can also be self-centered in the sense that you can't really see beyond yourself, right? If somebody else brings it up to you, then you're like, oh, I know the decision I have to make for the better good. But only if somebody else, I think that's also a thing where you're talking about going and seeking people out. He is seeking people out for him. Yes. Until he's seeking people out for her. The scene opens with, it's bookended by Clarence saying really wonderful lines, but just that strange, isn't it? Let me find it. Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? And if we, just pretend that man applies to all humans.
Yes. It is 1946. So.
Oh, yeah, look, I'm not throwing shade, right? Like, but I think it can be so hard. And I think that's also like an effect of depression, right? Because George is depressed and they don't talk about it. They don't really have the language for it in this. But it's a thing about mental illness where it's not selfish, right? He just is in a mental state where he really can't see beyond himself. And he can't see, he also hasn't weighed in that there are all these people caring enough about him.
He doesn't see it.
No, he can't, right? Yeah. He's got these blinders on that I think we can attach in some ways to like mental health issues. I know I've seen that in people that I love when they've experienced depression, or, are continually experiencing depression, that inward gaze, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tip it.
And the other reason that I picked this scene is because there's a parallel that I've always really appreciated with this film between the way that Harry's brother almost dies in the alternate universe, which is drowning in icy water, and the way that George chooses to end his life, which is to jump into the icy river. And I think that that's an intentional parallel. And I think this scene really calls it out.
Yeah.
For George to be standing there looking at his brother's tombstone, who died in the way that he intended to kill himself.
Yeah.
Is very powerful.
To also have the reality, right, of being on the other side of it. Not that his brother in this alternate version intended for that to happen, but he experiences just a little bit, and they don't call it out. But yeah, I've not thought about that before. But he is experiencing in that moment what he would have been putting everybody who loved him through, including his mom, who we see very affected.
Yes. And sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Catch it, reach for it in the air.
And the effect that him saving his brother's life had on other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. That it spins out.
That it's not just about himself or his brother, but all the people who his brother saved in the war.
I'm
the impact that you have on other people's lives without even knowing it.
Yeah. I mean, now that we have the internet. No, I'm just kidding. We still don't, I don't think we can, George is given a bit of omnipresence, right? In a way of being able to see this. And that's one of the gifts that he's being given. But yeah, the same way that I don't think that we could take in all the sorrow that we've caused without knowing it. I don't know if we could take in all the joy that we've caused without knowing it. I do wish people brought up the joy a little bit more. I think we have a tendency to be like, you didn't know how you hurt me, person, more than we are like, you didn't know how you made me so happy this one day. Although I think we've experienced that a bit too. But I do also love, what he closes on, which I'm guessing is the, where it comes from for the title, but don't you see, or, you see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Yeah. Yeah, Clarence is trying to take the blinders off of him, to your point. He's trying to make him see the bigger picture.
Yeah. And not just like, it's also that, and I think it's the importance of like a daily gratitude practice, to focus on what you have, like, and I guess part of why we want to do this podcast, right? Like, there is what you've lost, and what you've lost is real, and it's real pain, and it shouldn't be ignored. But at the same time, like, what you have is also real. And there can be quite a trade-off in acknowledging the realness of what you don't have, and then ignoring at the expense of what you do. And I think, we can get into like culture and how we've been kind of trained by, if we want to go back to like capitalism, to focus on what we don't have, because then we can buy it. But I do think that, so sorry. You've mentioned that this is something that you watch yearly. Always only at Christmas, or other times as well?
I have watched it randomly at other times, but usually at Christmas. Yeah. And I have had the distinct pleasure of being able to watch it in a movie theater on the big screen.
Ooh, I have as well at the, where did you watch it?
Oh, somewhere in Manhattan. I don't remember which year it was.
Yeah.
It's always playing somewhere at Christmas, right? So you can seek it out and do that. And it's totally worth doing that. It's also, I've also done the thing where I turn it on while I'm, baking cookies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's definitely like a thing that I turn on for comfort as well, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a movie that gets really dark in places. But so I've done the thing where it's on and I'm sort of half paying attention to it, but I often will also intentionally watch it, watch it. And I think it's a movie that's been around so much and people think they know it. And a lot of people have really only seen snippets of it.
With commercials in between. Because it was on TNT.
The people who've only watched it that way, because they'll always say, "Oh, that movie's so corny."
Yeah.
No, it's a movie about a guy who wants to kill himself.
Yeah. Who's about to, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's got a plan. This is not ideation. Like, he's made a plan and he's going to go do it.
Yeah. And also, spoiler alert, the bad guy gets away with it at the end. I mean, it's a very dark film in a lot of ways. And, and I think if there's anyone listening to this who hasn't actually sat and just watched the film from beginning to end, I highly recommend that you do, because there's a lot more to it than sort of like the corny bits that you've seen about it, or just that final scene. Like, that final scene, if that's all that you've seen, it's a huge payoff to everything that came before. So yeah, watch it.
Right. But if you've skipped to the reward without the anguish, then the reward doesn't.
And it feels really corny. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I do agree. I've gotten to see it. I think it was actually this summer, because they do a classic movie series here at the Paramount downtown. And I think it was like a classic Christmas in summer. And I do love a little, like, just a hint of summer Christmas every now and then.
Is that some hope in the darkness? Because in Austin, we're 100 degrees for 3 months, and
I think so. Yeah.
An icy river seems like a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, are you a Capra fan?
I've seen some of his other films. He was really a great filmmaker and prolific. And I think that this particular film was not well received at the time. Like, people didn't know what to do with it. And I think it speaks a lot to the message of the film and the good bonesiness of the film, that it's become such a classic and that people love it so much, because I think it helps a lot of people. But I do love Capra. The two that come to mind are It Happened One Night, which is like a wonderful screwball comedy.
Quite risque. Yeah. Clark. So good. Is it Clark Gable and? Yeah. Claudette. Yeah.
And then Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which also has Jimmy Stewart in it.
Yeah.
And is kind of I guess it's thematically similar in some ways, right? It's this very idealistic person. The character's very different, but it's this very idealistic person who sort of accidentally ends up a senator, by appointment, and tries to really like go to Washington and be, get the good things done. And everyone around him is just trying to break him or use him. And he manages to maintain
himself,
his integrity, So there's some similarity there, I think. But Capra was a very prolific filmmaker. I mean, this is like old Hollywood, just like cranking films.
Oh yeah, it's a job. I'm not an artist. This is my job. You're not an artist. You're an actor. This is your job. Get it done. It was Mill, right? Like, it was a movie in the studio. In the studio age, it was
and even like the script. I know the script went through many hands before it arrived at the final version. So like the three people I mentioned at the beginning are the three who got the official credit, and Frank Capra definitely had his hands in. I mean, it is his, it's his work, really. But there were at least three other authors, as doing some Googling earlier. So I just want to call out Joe Swerling, Michael Wilson, and Dorothy Parker were also people who worked on the script.
Dorothy Parker.
Love Dorothy Parker.
It's a gem.
So and it's based on a short story, and it's a very kind of Hollywood script where it got sold to one studio, and then they sold the rights to another studio, and there were multiple versions of the script. So there are lots of hands in it, lots of minds, lots of artists shaping it into the final piece that we know.
Yeah. So Nancy, you mentioned that this is something that, you turn to when you need something, whatever that might be. Are there any particular instances that you can think of in your life?
I mean, that feeling that he has of being a failure is something that I have struggled with a lot in my life. Like, I definitely have had dreams that I walked away from. Things that I've things now that I feel like I should have accomplished by now in my life, as a middle-aged lady, like, that I still haven't accomplished. Right? Like, I get that. Like, there's a moment earlier in the film where he utterly loses his temper with the kids and just loses it. Right? This is another moment that I think about when people say that the film is corny, and I'm like, oof, you haven't seen that scene.
Yeah.
He's mean, and he has a kind of little setup in the corner of the living room, where he's got like his sort of like architecture, like models set up and things. It's like where he's still sort of trying to like, chip away at that dream. And he destroys it. He like knocks it all off the table and just, like he really feels like a failure. Like, everything he set out to do, he was not ever able to accomplish, and it weighs on him. And I know that feeling. Like, I know what it feels like. Yeah. So I identify with him a lot. Like, I really understand where he's coming from. And I always try to bring, like, when I'm in that headspace, just really like seeing myself in the worst possible light. Like I come back to George Bailey and like, you are not the way that you see yourself when you're seeing yourself in the worst possible light. That's one tiny piece of who you are. Like think about the way that all of the other people in your life see you and what they would say if they could see this dark space in your head and how you see yourself, like how they would contradict that. Yeah. Right? The way that all of his loved ones pray for him because he's in their minds, he's such a good man, and he is, but he's also the angry failure, right? He's all of those things at once, but he's not just one of those things. He's not just the failure. Yeah. So I always come back to it, and I always come back to Clarence's words in The Inscription and Tom Sawyer. No man is a failure who has friends. Yeah. If you touch other people's lives, if you love and are loved, that's what matters.
I'm going to cry. Yeah. In no small part, Nancy, because you taught me how to knit. Well, Keely taught me how to knit, but you taught me how to knit better. And you taught me how to crochet. And you've taught me so many things. Years and years ago, decades at this point. And just when you say that, like, I think about the number of people that I've made happy, that I have brought some joy into their life because I made them something. I've crocheted wedding shawls, and like, I wouldn't have been able to do that if you hadn't taught me. I don't know if I would have wanted to do it if I hadn't watched you sit there and crochet the tiniest, most amazing shawl. The shawls aren't tiny, but the hook is tiny and the thread is very thin and it's very advanced. And so like, I can think about almost like a web, right? Like that has been made of like the joy, right? I'm finishing up a blanket for my toddler. It was going to be a baby blanket, but like, shh.
Well, and the joy that you've given me, I have this beautiful scarf. I have this adorable little jaunty hat.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Nancy is that craft grandmother.
Thank you.
Yes. Good.
Sire, I guess we could say craft sire sounds there's nothing wrong with grandmother, but craft sire. So like I can immediately think of like the joy that I have brought other people as a direct result of like this joy that not even like touching on how much it means to me that I'm able to do this and that I was introduced to this by you. So I guess like, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that with me. I'm gonna keep that. I'm going to keep that in my heart for the next time I'm having a George Bailey moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a podcast.
That's a podcast.
We did it, although, like, yeah, we did want to talk about just a little bit about how you're a witch.
Yeah.
And you taught me how to read tarot, which was like, Nancy is like spookily. Is that the right word? I don't know, but you're like, you have done some amazing readings for me that
Yeah, I tend to read more. I think some people want tarot readings that are like, you're going to meet someone in 6 months.
Oh, no.
I don't read like that because I can't read like that. When I do tarot readings or other divinatory works for people, it's like, it's very much about, it's the true meaning of the word divination, right? It's about seeking truth, seeking understanding from a source outside of yourself, whatever you believe that to be. And so, people come for like advice on whether or not they should take this vacation, and it ends up being about, why are you denying yourself joy?
Yeah. I think our readings were definitely more around like, what's the path? Am I on the path for the things? And the reflection that you have helped me find has been, spooky. In a really wonderful way. And I guess, how do you feel about angels? Or kind of this, I know that's such a stupid big question.
No.
How do you feel about angels? But no, but since this is, right, like this emissary.
Yeah, I definitely have a sense that we all have a kind of higher self. There's a kind of esoteric occult theory of multiple souls, which is the thing that people believe in lots of different cultures, like a tripart soul. But one of them being the part of yourself that is directly connected to the divine source, right? Mm-hmm. So the higher self. So I tend to think more of that as, I guess, an angel more than like the literal, like the angels that, are sent from heaven.
Claire,
right?
You're talking about Clarence.
Yeah, not Clarence. But yeah, to me, it's more that like the guiding piece within you that is directly connected to divinity. There are witches who believe in angels and work with that energy. And I'm not saying I don't believe that type of entity exists. But for me, when I think of this film and I think of Clarence as an angel, I think it's really interesting that the whole alternate reality sequence is bookended by George on the bridge. Mm-hmm. Right? Like it starts with him on the bridge and it ends with him on the bridge asking, to be allowed to be alive again. And you could read it as that whole alternate reality sequence is an allegory for the struggle that's happening in his own heart and his own mind, right? Like he's been on the bridge the whole time, actually.
Yeah.
And that whole interaction is an interaction with his higher self, like to this better understanding of his life and where, the role that he's played in the world.
I think that's really beautiful.
So I guess that's my thoughts on angels.
One amazing thoughts on angels. Now, what's your thought on Angel from Buffy the Vampire Slayer? No, I'm just kidding.
I think that's a different podcast.
It is a different it's a different podcast. Actually, there are so many podcasts about Angel from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We don't need another one. And I wouldn't do it.
No, there are some that are much better. And
I wouldn't be the right one to lead it because yeah. Anyway,
probably the previous guest right before your episode has a really good podcast about Angel.
I don't remember though if you're into Buffy, Nancy.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, of course you are. I'm dumb.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I feel like this is a thing that we've actually watched in my living room at my old place.
They have at some point.
I feel like since Kate and I are choosing people we know and people they know, this is a very heavily Buffy influenced podcast, even when we don't talk about it.
Yes.
But it's there.
Also, like, we are also tending to be of a generation where
in every generation.
I didn't even mean to, but like in every generation, there are a bunch of women who watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer because they hadn't quite seen anything like it ever. And so I think that also plays a role in it too. I do think that different podcast. Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful, and we need a personal catch up at some point soon.
Yes, we do.
I love you and I miss you. And I miss when your job used to send you to Austin. That was
2 jobs ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that it was a terrible job, but I was deeply grateful to it. And then I've got to make it up to New York sometime soon. We can cut this bit out. But anyway, just logistics while I have you here. So thank you, podcast, for being. Thank you, listeners, for listening to us. Someday we will have people request. This is the part where we would give somebody a personalized good bones. I'm just going to keep saying it that way. Maybe it sounds a little sexy, you can trick people into doing it. If you would like a personalized selection for you or a loved one, I don't know. You can go to our website, findinggoodbones.com, and fill out a little form, or email findinggoodbones@gmail.com, and just let us know a little bit about yourself and maybe what you're going through, and we will pick something for you to think about. Mm-hmm. Other than that, thank you, Amy, for being a host.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Nancy, for being a guest.
Thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us as we go finding good bones.